Kwame inhaled sharply. Then who is next? Yaw slowly turned his head, locking eyes with him. You, Kwame. The room suddenly felt too small. The fire crackled. Kwame could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. No, it couldn't be. I didn't do anything. Kwame protested, but Yaw only looked at him with sad, knowing eyes. The shadow does not choose blindly, Yaw murmured. You have a sin, Kwame. And now, the shadow will come for you. At that moment, the fire in the hut flickered out. Darkness swallowed the room. And in the silence, Kwame heard it. A whisper. His own shadow had started to move. Kwame's breath caught in his throat. The room was pitch black, but something moved. He could feel it. A presence. Watching. Waiting. A cold whisper curled through the air. You cannot run, Kwame. His heart pounded. He spun toward the doorway, but his own shadow stretched unnaturally, blocking his path. It was taller now, darker, wrong. Yaw struggled to move, his voice barely a whisper. Do not let it touch you. Kwame didn't need to be told twice. He lunged backward, just as the shadow's fingers reached for him. The air felt like ice as it passed by his face. You cannot escape your sin. Kwame's hands clenched into fists. He had no sin. This shadow was lying. It had to be. But Yaw's words echoed in his mind. The shadow does not choose blindly. Kwame's stomach twisted. What had he done? Thud! The walls of the hut trembled. The floor cracked beneath Kwame's feet. Yaw's voice was strained. It's coming through. Kwame gritted his teeth. No, he wasn't going to wait for it to take him. He grabbed the wooden box with shaking hands. If this thing was unleashed because the box was disturbed, maybe putting it back would stop it. He shoved the lid open. Nothing inside, just darkness. A deep, endless blackness that seemed to breathe. The shadow lunged. Yaw shouted something, but it was drowned by a shrill, unnatural scream. The shadow was being sucked toward the box. Kwame's arms trembled as he held it open. Go back! The shadow writhed, its form twisting violently. Then suddenly, silence. The hut went still. The air no longer felt heavy. The fire sputtered back to life. Yaw coughed weakly. Did it work? Kwame looked down at the box. The darkness inside had settled. The carvings on the lid glowed faintly. He let out a breath. I think so. But deep inside, he knew this wasn't over. The shadow had spoken the truth. He had a sin, and one day, the shadow would return for it. Yaw's breathing was heavy as he stared at the sealed box. His old fingers trembled as he wiped sweat from his forehead. Kwame swallowed hard. The hut was quiet again, but his hands still felt cold. Too cold, as if something of the shadow still lingered. He didn't trust it. He didn't trust himself. Yaw's tired voice broke the silence. We must bury it again, far from this place. Kwame nodded, his grip tightening on the cursed box. Where? Yaw hesitated. His old eyes studied Kwame carefully. There is only one place that can hold such evil. He lowered his voice. The cursed hills. Kwame's stomach twisted. The cursed hills. A place of wandering spirits. A place no one dared go. But if that was the only way to stop the shadow, he had no choice. Yaw coughed weakly. You cannot go alone. The spirits will fight back. Kwame's jaw tightened. Then who will go with me? Yaw opened his mouth to speak, but then the hut shook violently. A wind without a source howled through the room, scattering ashes from the fire. Kwame's heart slammed against his ribs. The shadow was not gone. Did you think you could trap me forever? A chill crawled up Kwame's spine. It was still here, watching, whispering. But how? Then Kwame saw it. On the wall behind him, his shadow stood still. But something was wrong. It was smiling, a jagged, wicked grin carved into the darkness. Kwame stumbled back, gripping the box tightly. His own shadow was no longer his own. Yaw's voice was urgent. Go. Take it to the hills before it's too late. Kwame's breath came in sharp gasps. He had no time to question, no time to doubt. The hunt had not ended. It had only just begun. He turned and ran into the night. Kwame ran into the night, his heartbeat pounding louder than his footsteps. The cursed box was clutched tightly in his arms, its weight far heavier than its size. The shadow was still with him. He could feel it creeping along the ground behind him, stretching unnaturally under the moonlight. Yaw's voice echoed in his mind. Take it to the cursed hills before it's too late. But Kwame knew that reaching the hills would not be easy. The land itself rejected travelers. And worse, his own shadow was now his enemy. The wind howled through the trees as he ran. The path twisted through the thick jungle, and every branch seemed to grab at him like unseen hands. Then, a voice slithered through the air. Why do you run, Kwame? His breath hitched. The voice was coming from his own shadow. I am a part of you. You cannot escape yourself. Kwame's grip tightened on the box. You are not me, he growled. The shadow laughed. Then why do you feel me inside you? Why does your heart tremble? Kwame's steps faltered. The doubt in his heart stirred. Yaw had said the shadow only hunted those who had sinned. But Kwame had done nothing wrong. Had he? Then, a whisper from the past. A face flashed in his mind. A boy. Jabari. Kwame staggered. The memory was sharp, sudden. Jabari, his childhood friend. The river. The fight. The secret he had buried. Do you remember now? The shadow crooned. Kwame's breath came in short gasps. No, it wasn't true. It couldn't be true. But the shadow knew. It always knew. The jungle grew darker, the trees closing in around him. Then, the ground beneath his feet vanished. Kwame tumbled forward. He had reached the edge of the curse hills. But before he could move, something grabbed his ankle. His own shadow had him in its grip. It dragged him toward the darkness. You cannot bury the past, Kwame. The shadow pulled him down. And for the first time in his life, Kwame screamed. Kwame struggled, clawing at the dirt as his own shadow dragged him toward the abyss. His fingers scraped against sharp rocks, but he refused to let go. The cursed hills yawned before him, a land where the dead never slept. You cannot run from me, Kwame, the shadow whispered, its grip tightening around his leg. Desperation clawed at his throat. He had to fight. With a roar, he twisted his body and kicked hard. His foot passed through the shadow like mist, but for a moment, its grip loosened. That was all he needed. Kwame pushed himself up and scrambled forward. The cursed box still clutched in his hands. The hills loomed ahead, jagged and lifeless. No birds, no insects, just silence. The air was thick, pressing against his skin. He had reached the place where spirits wandered. Yaw had warned him. The spirits will fight back. Kwame swallowed hard. He had to bury the box before the shadow fully consumed him. But then the ground trembled. A terrible wail echoed through the night. The air itself shivered with rage. He was not alone. Shadows rose from the earth. They had no faces, only twisted figures of darkness. They reached for him, whispering in voices of the long-forgotten, "You do not belong here." Kwame took a shaky step back.